Well, it appears the JT Miller media wars have begun. And I'm kind of referring to a very specific piece. This is a piece that was published by Harmondale on The Athletic just the other day. Link will be in the description once more if you want to go ahead and read this, because we always go ahead and give the writers their dues. JT Miller's agent sees a realistic path for an extension with the Canucks. This was published, as we said, by Harmon on July 20th, 2022. And if we go over onto Taj's Twitter account, there are some quotes from the piece that I do find noteworthy enough to make a video about, because it kind of highlights just the perspectives here. Harmon's article pretty much goes over the perspectives of the two sides involved. First, you have Miller himself and the agent, the Miller camp, as everybody's going to go out there and call it, and then you have the Vancouver Canucks themselves. Alvin, Rutherford, the team, and what exactly they feel is the entire situation right here regarding JT Miller and his status on the trade block. I will say, though, before we get into this discussion, there have been a few extenuating factors that have, honestly, in my opinion at least, changed the idea of what the Miller status is on the trade block. In particular, we had ourselves a few big-name hockey players leave their teams, Johnny Gaudreau going from Calgary over to Columbus, and then you have, of course, Mateychuk that is going to leave as well. Plus the idea that you have Pierre-Luc Dubois also getting thrown around there in trade conversations too. What these moves mean in the grand scheme of things is that JT Miller, a 100-point NHL player with a $5.625 million cap hit till the end of next season, is all of a sudden not that valuable. Now, I get it. He's valuable, and teams are going to shell out massive assets if they want to get this player, but because there's a Mateychuk available too, it makes other teams say, hey, okay, wait a minute, do we really need to shell out all too much for Miller? Let's go over to Calgary and ask Brad Treliving what he wants for his player. Let's go over to Winnipeg and ask what they want for Dubois. Let's go over to Nazem Kadri and ask him what he wants as a contract, because he's still a free agent at the time of recording this audio. JT Miller is no longer the number one dude on the market because you have a few other players that have firstly gotten swapped around, like Kevin Fiala and Alex DeBrincat, and you have even more that might get swapped around too. In fact, you could debate that the Alex DeBrincat trade, in a way, lowered the value for JT Miller because that trade was so lopsided. For Kevin Fiala, after that trade was made, we had an idea or two getting thrown around by Vancouver Canucks-related insiders saying, hey, if the Canucks do trade away Miller, they want a bigger package than what the LA Kings had to give up to get Kevin Fiala. And so with all these ideas considered, plus the fact that the Vancouver Canucks did get a few offers from, for example, the New York Rangers around the trade deadline, that in which they said no to, it's a lot easier to see now that a JT Miller trade that the Canucks would have been okay with accepting may be a little bit more difficult to come across than we would have expected. And so, with that idea in mind, let's go over onto Taj's Twitter account to read some quotes from this latest Harmondale piece. JT Miller's agent discusses the Canucks' future. There is a realistic path for an extension. This is what Taj goes out there and says here. Miller's agent is trying to put pressure on the Canucks. The PR battle wars have begun. This is the quote on the article. He would be on board with an extension, Bartlett says about his client, JT Miller. The part that we can't answer is at what value or level the team places on him. From our end, from JT's end, there is a path forward on an extension, but it takes two to tango, I guess. What he's pretty much saying here is that, yeah, no, JT was okay with an extension, man. We already kind of knew that from all the information we had seen from his family, his little girls. They like it here in Vancouver. That's a good sign. But Miller's agent is saying, yeah, no, he's good with an extension. It's just a matter of whether or not the Vancouver Canucks want to extend the player. And it's really easy to see what this kind of comment insinuates here. He's pretty much just saying, yeah, okay, if the Canucks give him money, he'll stay. This is not going to be Gaudreau, Tkachuk 2.0, where the Flames can give Johnny Gaudreau as much money as they can muster up, $10.5 million by 8 years, and he's just going to end up leaving and going to Columbus for less money. It's not going to be like that. You give the guy money, he'll stick around because JT's okay with playing here in Vancouver. The question is, though, Vancouver, how much do you value my client? Here's another comment made by Harmondale in the same article. Miller's camp made it very clear that they have zero problems waiting things out and playing out the final year of his contract without a resolution. And you know, you're starting to tread into dangerous waters, my friend, because I can think of a few things that happen here. Firstly, what if in the first week of the season JT Miller gets injured? He's out for, 6 months, and he comes back, he plays, let's say 30, 35 games on the full season, and he gets like 30 points. If the JT Miller party in a year from now is like, okay, well, our client was injured for most of the season, but he was still a point per game, and he had 100 points last year. Give us $7 or $8 million on a long-term deal. The Vancouver Canucks are not going to be able to do that unless they shell out significant money elsewhere in the roster, or they're able to guarantee that Miller is able to play at that level for the next 8 years. Sure, some players can age well into their 30s. We saw that with the Sedins. We saw that with other very good NHL players throughout the years. But JT Miller does not play a style of game that I feel gets better with age, like Henrik and Daniel's mind manipulation techniques in the corners. Miller plays that sort of Jamie Benn style, where he's a hard-nosed winger. He can play on the wing, he can play on the boards, he can play physically, he can dominate a shift. And we're seeing right now with Jamie Benn that contracts like that can really age out poorly. Now, obviously, that's one example out of many, but Miller is not the type of player that I feel would age all too well into the cores of the Hughes and Pettersson era, and I do think that Miller has a lot more to lose heading into the next few years in terms of his play style and how he develops. Now, I know I have the chance to be wrong here, but that's just how I feel about the situation and the way that he plays. All in all, the Vancouver Canucks might not be able to afford a long-term extension with Miller from an on-ice standpoint because of how he's able to perform, as well as financially because he still has some other contracts to consider as well. Pettersson is going to need a new contract in a few years, Podkolzin is going to come off his ELC soon, and so the idea of waiting for JT Miller to play out his extra year without an extension, man, that's kind of tricky there. I don't really know how I feel about that. Also, the idea of him potentially having the option to walk if the Vancouver Canucks just don't give him enough money by next year's free agent negotiation period. You could lose him out for free, but who really knows what's going to happen there. We also had some comments made by Patrick Allvin in the same Harmondale article, and it's kind of funny because Allvin is not really showing off his cards, which I like. Harmon asked Allvin the question everyone wants to know. Will they trade Miller if they're in a playoff spot at the trade deadline? He talks in circles and refuses to really answer the question. Everything we do is calculated, Allvin said, and I think it's more about what the return would be and how our future would be and how it would impact us right now. I guess that's more of a hypothetical question. If we haven't solved it leading up to the trade deadline with a contract extension, I would think that that's definitely something we need to sit down as an organization and have a conversation about what direction we are going. Yeah, he didn't really answer the question now. It's all hypothetical, it's all circumstantial, it's all dependent on other things, but at the end of the day, Allvin doesn't necessarily say yes or no on whether or not they would trade JT Miller if they're in a playoff spot at the trade deadline. We now have memes like this popping up here. Francesco Aquilini waiting to veto any Miller trade now that the division is wide open to make the playoffs, and more importantly, playoff money. And I know Taj is being kind of satirical here when he says this, but a part of me does kind of think, Francesco Aquilini was so hard-nosed on making the playoffs, which is why Jim Benning made all the crazy moves that he did. Who knows if the Calgary Flames losing out on Tkachuk and Gaudreau and becoming a worse team really gives the Vancouver Canucks an opportunity or two to break into that wildcard race. Who knows if that's the case here, and who knows if Aquilini will step in and say, okay, you're going to trade away Miller at the trade deadline for a big package that you finally got after waiting it out for a year? Sorry, we want to keep this guy, we want to make the playoffs, we want to make the second round, we want to make revenue, and yada yada yada. Who really knows if that's the case here? So, my friends, let me just tell you this, the media wars have begun. The PR wars have begun between Allvin, Miller, and his agent and everything. Who knows if there's a trade going down soon? I honestly am a lot more pessimistic that a trade is going to happen after being so confident that a trade was going to happen on day one of the draft, but now, with Gaudreau leaving and Tkachuk potentially being in the market too, Dubois is also in the market as well, and you have Kadri still as a free agent, I do not really know if the Vancouver Canucks are going to get a Miller trade done, because I don't really know if any team is going to shell out a package that they actually feel comfortable in accepting. Because that's the one thing I've said this entire time. The one thing you cannot do in this Miller thing is settle. And Patrick Allvin has been patient enough to the point that I doubt that he has had any super good offers on the table that he would have been foolish to say yes to. It just doesn't feel like that's the market anymore with all the conversations that have been going around. So, talk to the comments on your thoughts about Miller, the contract extension topic, the trade topic, and where you feel this entire thing is going to go. I hope you enjoyed this Juraj Rolls 99, and Bye.